Reboot It!
Hey everyone, I'm Ron Swallow, and welcome to Reboot Rewind, the official after show for Reboot It. Today, we're diving into the Season 4 premiere, and to date, our biggest episode ever. Over 7,000 views and climbing, the X-Men. Let's talk about how this one came about, guys.
Well, let's do it.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I feel like I have a pretty encyclopedia-like knowledge of every episode. In this one, I was like, I actually don't even remember when this one was pitched. It just was like, we're doing it. And then we started.
Well, I mean,
there may be a reason for that.
Well, I was going to say, to rewind even further, like we had a very nebulous start date for season 4 because we were in the middle of the pandemic. We were coming off a pandemic season with season 3 and the rewinds, which we had all kind of been using to try to get our lives sorted out as the year was starting. And I think that we were just trying to figure out, like, all right, how do we come out hot out of the gate? And X-Men floated out there, I think maybe via Ed, but it was part of that conversation of like, when are we even going to start season 4?
I mean, I will cop to the fact that since we started this enterprise, I've been pushing X-Men on some level. But at the same time, I think we had to get, like, how Clint Eastwood had to get old enough to play Will Money in Unforgiven. We had to earn some skills over these seasons in order to do this and to come upon the streaming season idea. You know what I mean? We can get into that later, but like all of those things came together to be a perfect storm to make X-Men a really great episode.
I do remember when you were pushing for X-Men, it was always my thing was like, it either has to be a premiere or it has to be a finale. Like there's a couple properties. I think Justice League was one. I still think Harry Potter is one, and X-Men, where it's like those are big ones, and there's not a lot of big ones left to do. So like let's save it. And obviously, I think Ed, you pushed for this to be the premiere, and it paid off in dividends because it just kind of like took off in a way we weren't expecting.
Yeah, I mean, I think we added on subscribers as well as getting big views too. So that was a pretty great thing. Well, what were you going to say?
I know we're going to get into this, but I was not expecting this to hit the way that it did. And I don't know where my pop culture blind spot came in, but like, I understand that people love the X franchise. Like, I know that, but this was like bigger than any of the other MCU properties we had done, bigger than any of the DC properties we had done, including Batman and Justice League at the height of the Snyder Cut nonsense. Like, how did this hit so big? I'm baffled that there's that vociferous a fan base for X-Men out there still in the world. I really am.
Well, it blindsided us too, because maybe it's because the show had just started, but Wolverine didn't hit like this. So there was no indication that X-Men stuff was going to raise such a huge flag, but it did, because we got like 5 times the amount of comments on this one video that we usually do.
Well, look, I have a theory that when we reboot Spider-Man, it's going to click just as hard. And I have a big theory that a lot of the movies like X-Men, Spider-Man, and a few of those sort of big Spawn, for instance, is big because of the 90s comic book boom. So I believe X-Men with Chris Claremont in the 90s was the best-selling book they had ever had. Not just the best Spider-Man, but I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, Chris Claremont's sold like 16 million or something. Am I remembering that correctly? It's something insane.
That's an inflated number, but yes, I mean, it was the Chris Claremont, Jim Lee X-Men #1, still the best-selling comic book of all time. I believe it was either 7 or 8 million copies. But like, yeah. I mean, I hear that there is a lot of people got into comic book culture with X titles in the early 90s, and those people are now pretty much the bullseye of our audience. That said, I don't know, man. I feel like X-Men at this point is just that broken down old horse that's like you're halfway trying to decide if you're going to take it behind the barn and shoot it. But I guess I'm the only one that feels that way. That's interesting.
Well, I think that most people, I mean, we'll get into the comments and we'll also move on to another subject after this here in a second. But I think that most people think that all of the X-Men movies have pretty much been bad, except for that Hugh Jackman did a good job as Wolverine, and maybe Fassbender and a couple. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think anybody's been happy with anything but individual parts of those movies, but the overall movies, they haven't really thought they were done well.
I would be so bold as to say that will continue to be a problem for the X-Men as long as they are making X-Men properties. It is too bizarre and varied and multifarious a franchise for them to ever just hit the nail on the head in every respect.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
one thing if you do that with Batman, which is one character with one mythos and a ton of different interpretations. It's a whole other thing to do it with X-Men, which is 300 characters and who knows how many versions and blah, 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 blah. So anyway, needless to say, we'll probably get into it. I'm not super hot on X-Men, and I don't know if I brought that into the episode or not. But yeah, short version of all those comments caught me by surprise that this was such a big episode.
Absolutely.
Well, I remember reading just real quickly. I remember reading the comics that were just like, I think us starting, and it's funny that it's happening again on this episode. It's like we seem to start out with this X-Men stuff with, I don't get it. I don't know why it's such a big deal, and yada, yada, yada for a while. And then we go into this beautiful explanation of why it is a big deal, and we add our 2 cents to it and make it super fresh. And people go like, I think the people stuck through all that to find out how fresh we were going to make it. Coming from those outsider perspective, not just loving it so much that you can't see how to reformat it. Why would you love it so much up to the point of actually making it work for now? I'd say love it enough to make it work for now. And I think that's what we did.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So this episode was the beginning of a season-long story arc within the show itself. How did all that come about?
I remember it was not too long after season 3 ended, and I won't speak for anyone else but myself. I was a little disenchanted with the show at this point. It was becoming a little stale, a chore. And I remember getting on an email thread or something like, what can we do to just inject a little bit of life back into this? And I think Bill wrote up like 5 different suggestions. And I think we took 2 of them, which was go to a different director or producer every single time. And then another one, which was let's just do all streaming services. And we kind of smashed them together, and it created the best season that we've done yet.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. One of the things I've always loved about the format that we came up with was the kayfabe that we are working for John Peters, because it allowed the show to be more than just the sum of its parts. Like, the meat of the show is and always will be us sort of doing this incredible writer's room exercise and just trying to see what our brains can come up with together in the course of an hour and a half. But if we can put a second layer in there, which is sort of commenting on the dynamics of how Hollywood makes these sorts of movies or TV shows, whatever, these franchise properties, I've just always loved that. I've loved the fact that we've got this subtle layer of commentary about the entire, franchise IP process baked into the show. And I think that this was just a graduation of what we had been doing since day one. But I agree with Billy that was getting a little bit stale. And so busting out of the confines of John Peters' office, I think was a big help, a big shot in the arm to the show.
I think people don't realize too that I'd say 50% of the time, I still call it the John Peters just as a shorthand, but the producer suggestion is half the time it's a little silly, but half the time, and Ultraman comes to mind, and we'll get to that episode at some point, but that's a conversation that I 100% promise you is happening. Like some of these bombshells that we drop, like if you ever watch a movie and you're like, man, that could have been good, but what happened? Like that's what happens. They got John Peters at some point because those conversations actually happen. So sometimes it's a little annoying and eye rolling, but then sometimes it helps. And most of the time, it's probably something that would actually happen.
Yeah. So some of you may have heard me told this story before, but Dragon Ball Evolution was a movie, a live action Dragon Ball Z movie that came out. It was terrible. And I looked up who wrote it out of spite at first. But then I found the guy and I was looking at his page, and the dude loves Dragon Ball Z. It was like super. He had like a bunch of stuff on Dragon Ball Z. He clearly loved Dragon Ball Z. And so I messaged him and was like, hey, man, like, what happened? And he wrote back and he said, I almost took my name off of this movie, but they weren't going to pay me if I didn't put my name on it. And basically they came to him and gave him all these suggestions that he basically had to take. And he did the very best he could do with terrible suggestions. And that's what ended up happening. So like sometimes it's the fault of other people. And then this poor writer, I looked him up in anger to let him know how mad I was.
I've never gotten so far as to watch something I didn't like, track the person that wrote it down, be like, why did you do this to me?
You want to know what's worse?
Are you done, Spitz? Did you guys straight and we don't know?
You know what's worse is I don't even know, like, I don't know who wrote Enter the Dragon. And it's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
And it's like one of those things. It's like I got mad enough about Dragon Ball, so that's pretty sad. And you're right. I should look into that more.
And I think that is something that it's going to come up later in this episode in regards to the fans of X-Men, because as Bill so eloquently stated earlier, it is such a multifaceted property with so many different characters and so many different versions of so many different characters. You know what I mean? Each character is like one side of a Rubik's Cube. And you could just click. That's how many facets and how many characters are in this property. So depending on if you like your Rubik's Cube with yellow on this side and blue on that side and a couple reds on the top, all these weird conceptions of what you think is the X-Men. So many people have the X-Men. So when we came and did anything different than an old man sitting in a chair knitting while his little charges go beat up people in the night, anything different from that, and we got hella comments that were just not so.
But that's what I don't get. Maybe I'll save a lot of this for when we read them shortly. But it's just like, yeah, if it's such a Rubik's Cube of different machinations of X-Men, like, why is us coming in and doing one more twist of the cube such a sacrilege, FU to the canon?
We should hit on that once we get to the comments. So
okay.
Stop your talking right now. And let me ask you one more question. This was our third entry into an already established MCU, Wolverine and Fantastic Four being the other two. Did you guys feel it was difficult to not only have to keep the MCU continuity, but also the continuity that we set up for Wolverine?
I love that you say continuity like you're English, like aluminium continuity.
Well, here's the secret. I've never said that word out loud, and I've only read it. So wow, that's what you get when I've never said that word.
We're learning things on Reboot Rewind. I love it. It's a double-edged sword because you already have a sandbox to play in, so a lot of the really heavy lifting is kind of already done because it exists. But that being said, there's handcuffs that come with that too, because the world already exists, and you definitely have to color inside a certain set of lines. I think for this one in particular, we kind of only had to play within the rules that we ourselves already established, so it wasn't quite as hard. We didn't include any like Spider-Man or whatever, Captain America, the Hulk, or anything like that. So it wasn't like we had to kind of keep a pulse on what's happening in the MCU, but it's always tough whenever we work within the MCU.
Yeah, I'll say one of the things in this episode in particular that I found frustrating, but ultimately came around to being a really nice element, was that we were looking for, a secret government organization that's going to be tasked with hunting down mutants. And I think in the Wolverine episode, we were just like, they're S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, without really paying attention to the fact that, like, S.H.I.E.L.D. is gone, and the whole idea of, like, a secret spy organization is kind of problematic currently in the MCU. And so in this episode, when we came all the way around to, like, what if it's not a secret agency? What if it's literally like a recruiting drive that's billing itself as like, hey, is your kid the next Avenger? Because, oh, wow, like the Avengers are dead or rebuilding in this continuity. I think that's where the sort of storytelling magic can happen. But I also think you really have to try hard to not be hack, because there is so much stuff that's already pre-established. It's really easy to just fall back on like, oh yeah, take some of that stuff, put it in this movie. I'm sure that'll be good. That's the sort of stuff that I don't want to do, that I think is really tempting when you're working within this sort of pre-existing continuity.
Well, yeah, and it's us disobeying this sort of there's this tendency to be like, Tony Stark gave Spider-Man all this stuff. Let's go. I don't have time to, you know what I mean? Just connect it all, connect it in this really easy way. And I really, I know these things turn into self fellatio or whatever, but like, I think the best part about this was that we tried to make it mean something when the X-Men are a thing. You know what I'm saying? Make it mean something when the X-Men are a thing, and also make it mean something when the average public, John Q public finds out what mutants are. Really show that moment, or really show that moment isn't just, hey, mutants over there. It's years of conspiracy theories of people going, I saw my cousin, he caught on fire one time. He caught on fire and he stops being on fire and he's like, I ain't got no clothes on, but I didn't catch on fire. You're crazy, Joey. That's mutantdom for 50 years. It's stuff like that. Apocryphal crap, cryptids, weird stuff. And then it comes to a head now with so much government concentration on this and so much preparation for the so-called mutant avalanche. So many of their preparations are so nefarious, and there's so much to it that there's so much of a secret history that we hinted at. That's so much better than any of this other stuff. I'm sorry. That's so much better.
You know what?
A secret
you know
history.
What I like. I like that our continuity was happened to just match the Falcon and Winter Soldier as well.
Yep, I would agree. I wouldn't agree with the accent, but I would agree with that sentiment that like clearly we were playing with ideas that are on the minds of the actual writers and producers of the MCU right now. And yeah, I mean, I think that also speaks to, something that we run into a lot. And this is another sort of double-edged sort of dealing with these pre-existing properties, is there is a certain amount of convergence of thinking. Like anytime you're trying to put your brain to, okay, we've got this thing, here are its constituent parts, here are the parts around it that already exist, and here's us wanting to do something fresh and different and use what's there, but not use it in an expected way. And, come up with something that people are going to really respond to. Like, there's only so many things you could do within that rigid of a framework. And so, I don't know whether to wear it as a badge of honor or whether to get pissed at us, but sometimes we're going to come up with stuff that's being done over here by the official version. It's just kind of inevitable. I don't think that should be a knock against us in your eyes. I just always feel frustrated, like, God damn it, we should be doing it better than what they're doing. We can't do it as good, then we're worthless. But that's also just like my weird psychological issues. So
totally fair. Well, we have a new way to let you guys know the pitch. I'm pretty excited about it because now I don't have to read it and get offended over stupid things. You can just listen to it. I got to thank Billy Business for coming up with that idea. So, Billy, why don't you give him the pitch?
This is a Disney Plus series that serves as a lead-in to future X-Men movies, and we are seeing all of the greatest X-Men characters splintered and scattered amongst warring factions of mutants in a world where the existence of mutants is not even yet known. On the X-Factor team, fronted by the U.S. government, we have Storm, we have Rogue, we have Colossus, we have Nightcrawler, and we maybe have Shadowcat. And they're a group of teenagers, the most powerful teenagers that have come forward to be recruited by Olivia Trask, played by Helen Mirren, who is a deep cover sister of Charles Xavier with a genocidal agenda. On the other side, the FARC Colombian terrorist-style organization X-Force is led by Regé-Jean Page, playing Cyclops in a hint to what he will later become as the heir apparent to Charles Xavier, giving us sort of the first step toward a true X-Men vs. Avengers movie. In the course of this movie, they are dealing with the U-Men who are trying to harvest mutant organs and the looming threat, the mysterious threat of the Charles Xavier Institute, which everybody fears and nobody quite knows the nature of. Towards the end of the first season, we can finally introduce Charles Xavier. Maybe it's Mark Strong, maybe it's Billy's choice. And we are taking baby steps as all these teenage heroes try to suss out who they are, what they stand for, and why, setting Charles Xavier up to be the true Martin Luther King of the mutant movement when he says, let us stand together, let us have a purpose. So not only do we have a few seasons of a Disney Plus show, we've got the setup for mutants as a franchise. The X-Men is still your first movie, but X Factor is the show that we are pitching you today. Did I leave anything out?
I mean, just put some respect on Kyle Chandler's name, please.
Oh, damn, that's right.
Put some respect on it.
I'm
just
sorry.
a little bit.
I'm sorry.
You also left out when Tom Holland's going to show up as Spider-Man.
You know what, though?
You know.
He probably is going to. I mean, I think that'd be really interesting.
He needs to spend some time hanging out with Dacre Montgomery as the Human Torch in our Fantastic Four reboot before he shows up in our X-Men franchise. Okay?
That's a good point.
Let it just be that. So, Mr. Feige, Mr. Scorsese, what do you say?
You know what? I think it's not bad. I think there's something there. I think you got something. I think it's in good shape for me to hand it over to my good friend, Nicholas Pileggi.
That one stings. That one still
Marty.
stings.
You know, that's a good example, though, actually. Like, that episode in particular, we wanted to come out strong. We had the dual producers between Feige and Scorsese. Mm-hmm. And I think everything about that was a little bit true to life in that, you know, it's very Feige to be like, oh, people are giving me a hard time about this. I'm going to lean all the way into it and jujitsu it back on them. So I'm going to hire Martin Scorsese. But then the reality is, if you hire Martin Scorsese, he's not going to make an X-Men movie. He's going to make a Scorsese movie starring the X-Men. Like, that's just how it works. You can't do it any other way, even if you want to.
By the way,
like, yeah.
I'm sorry to interject. I am going to give myself credit because we were going to have it be like, you guys suck. What are you thinking? You know nothing. And I was like, let's not set ourselves up as much. Let's maybe dial it back so we're good, but we just can't do it. And I think we did that for the rest of the season, which was not putting ourselves in a position where we suck. Although, I don't know, the comments maybe did it for us.
That's true. I was just going to say, though, again, it comes back to that idea that I would say every sort of strikeout that we had in season 4 is something that that either has happened or very realistically would happen. And this one is no exception. The idea that, like, you come up with a really strong pitch, you pitch it to a superstar director, and they're like, perfect. Let me hand it over to my hand-picked personal writer who's going to take a pass on everything and change it all up, which, frankly, is what happened for the better, but what happened with the original Superman movie. There's a script written by Mario Puzo, who was the hottest writer of the time, that by all accounts was nonsense. And Richard Donner was like, hey, Tom Mankiewicz, can you just do all this other stuff that Mario Puzo's not going to listen to me about? Can you just do a script with that? And that's how we got that movie. So that stuff happens all the time.
Absolutely. Do you guys still feel like it turned out good? Looking back on it here in the pitch, are you happy with it? Do you think we did the good job, guys?
The good job.
The goodest job.
Now, personally, what I enjoy about the pitch to this day, what I enjoy about the pitch is I like the fact that it presumes that it's not so cut and dried how the mutants all get together and get along and understand what each other are and understand all this stuff intrinsically. Homeboy Bill has been talking about Superman. I think we talked about it in our Superman episode. Why is Superman just born knowing that he's from Krypton and knowing everything and getting a little chip that he can go talk to Krypton and understand his whole lineage? When you have all that sussed out for you, that takes away a lot of discovery. It takes away a lot of like you being able to be manipulated by certain forces because you know exactly what you are. So you're steadfast from the get-go, which inhibits a certain sort of growth and change for character and drama. So like I love the fact that the mutants in our thing don't know what they are, don't know who to trust, don't know who to go to, and that's part of the drama, and that's part of their interpersonal drama, which isn't just evil guy, go fight evil guy. They got their own internal stuff. What is evil in this world? Who to trust?
And on top of that, if you think about it, all those people who love to be like, I just want a realistic version of comic book characters. I think this is a realistic thing that would happen if people suddenly got superpowers. The government would come in and try to come up with a way to use them. 100%. I mean, who wouldn't want a super soldier?
I also, though, like that we went a little bit more complex and a little bit different than just, say, the first Deadpool movie, right? Where it's like, I'm a nefarious mad scientist in some nondescript warehouse in Vancouver, and I'm going to, kidnap a bunch of people and throw them in tanks so that I could stick them with needles and take their blood out of them. Like, that has never been realistic. That is super played out. I do agree that, like, walking H-bombs are not going to go unaddressed by the government, but I think there's a lot more nuanced of a way to explore it than just evil government scientist kidnaps you and then sticks you with needles. Like, there's more nuance to what we did, and there's more nuance to what that would be in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
On the X Factor team is an illusion of choice that we put in there. That was very realistic. If you're a walking H-bomb, well, these are our bombs, you know what I mean? And they feel loved, and we pet them every day. You know what I mean? That's a very realistic permutation of that,
Yeah, Ed, you kept saying throughout the episode, or at a certain point in the episode, you were saying it's like the Warriors, the movie from the 80s, and then Xavier becomes like Cyrus, the one to, to be like, we own these streets. I think that's an amazing take, and it's one that really the comics haven't had, and I think that that's all the more reason why we should do, or why Marvel should do something like that. And it's kind of in line with what they're doing currently in the comics with the idea of mutants, being this, just because you are an ostracized minority doesn't mean that you're like quietly scuttling about in the shadows. Maybe it means you say, hey, you know what? Screw you, majority. Look what we're going to do just because we can. And I think that that's a way more modern version of this story and a way more interesting version of this story as well.
Totally. So this episode got almost 4 times the amount of comments that we usually get. So we want to try to get to a handful of the top ones.
Here we go.
Let's do it.
All right. We got the Pratt LP. Dude that questioned if fans are still digging X-Men is super out of touch. Like, way off. Like, what the are you smoking, brother?
First of all, I love that Hulk Hogan watches our show and takes the time to comment. That's really cool.
What are you smoking, brother?
What are you smoking,
brother?
Well, you know something, Bill. Defend yourself, Bill.
I mean,
by the way, they were like,
we got so many comments like this. Bill, I want you to explain yourself right now.
There were half the comments are just like, the guy that said they're out of touch. What is he smoking?
First of all, I'll fight all of you. I'll knock your goddamn teeth out. Don't disrespect me. I'm not here for it. Second of all, like I already said, I don't know why you like X-Men as much as you do, angry commenter. I just don't. I don't really get it. I understand that the X-Men have a lot going for them, but to me, the X-Men are the ultimate version of comic book mumbo gumbo, to use one of our own terms here. It's literally, you could throw anything you want into the pot. You want hell magic? Throw it in there. You want crazy spacefaring sci-fi? Throw it in there. You want very pointed social commentary? Throw it in there. And to me, it just becomes an anti-story at a certain point. And so that's X-Men in the comics. X-Men in other media, I watched and loved the 90s cartoon just like you did. I grew up on that shit. It also has its problems. And in terms of the movies, I mean, you have gotten like 6 different directors' visions at this point. You've gotten like 3 or 4 different continuities, depending on if you're including Deadpool. I don't know how you're not tired. Like, what kind of Adderall are you taking that you are not exhausted by this point? So that's the only place I'm coming from. It's not to say that I don't understand why you could find something to connect to in X-Men. Literally anybody on the planet can find something to connect to in X-Men. That's how it's designed. All I'm saying is that the way that this has just been run into the ground in pop culture, I don't understand how you're maintaining that enthusiasm. But if you are, good for you.
I think,
okay, go ahead.
Speaking just on the films, I think, you said, we've had X amount of directors, different visions for it. But the difference is, it's like, imagine, if every Batman movie we've had since 1989 was all set in the Burton universe. I think the problem with the X-Men movies is that X-Men was one of the first out the gate in 2000. And for 19 years, anyone that came in to do an X-Men movie, for whatever reason that they chose to do this, they had to play in the same established playground, even though the genre of comic book movies themselves had outgrown aesthetically the way that we tell those types of stories. And yet it was like this franchise was stuck in arrested development. So anyone that came in to do an X-Men movie was bound to this like archaic way, frankly, of doing one of those movies. So I think, at least when I chimed in to say, yeah, X-Men is a little tired, I think I meant it on film. And that's because, like, of course you're not going to do Dark Phoenix and knock it out of the park the second time when you're still playing by the same rules that you had to play in the first time around. Like, it's asinine.
If I can add to that, one of the things that I find really funny is you look at a show like Legion, right, which is technically in that same Bryan Singer X-Men continuity and is rightfully praised for being incredibly inventive and visually crazy and all this. By the same token, that's still a bunch of people in trench coats hanging out in a forest the same way X-Men 3 was 15 years ago. And so aesthetically, you're so dead on, Billy. Like, they just cannot figure out another way to, and I'm talking just in terms of locations and sets and costumes and hairstyles. They cannot figure out another way to make this thing look like it has just looked like the same shit for 25 years. And that I think there's an opportunity to maybe reinvent, but I also would argue that's where you start to get into mumbo gumbo. Like, you can't actually make them all look like their comic book counterparts. I think Bryan Singer has always been right about that, because that is just crazy nonsense. So I'm very curious to see how the MCU is going to handle that.
Yeah. I also want to add, like, one of my favorite MCU movies is Winter Soldier. When they, do that twist with Hydra actually having infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. And look, I've read a lot of comic books with S.H.I.E.L.D., and maybe I missed the run when that happened, but I don't remember a run of that happening. And it was great for the whole MCU. It was great to trade that up and to make S.H.I.E.L.D. be shook up, and for Captain America and for Black Widow and everybody involved with S.H.I.E.L.D. to question what they've been doing the whole time. So, like, sometimes you just go away from the comic book and do something original and interesting, and it makes one of the better movies in the entire run of comic book movies. So, I don't know.
Well, I mean, S.H.I.E.L.D. being a spy agency, they definitely have had billions of shakeups, but the way it's articulated in the movies is unique and interesting. And I think much like that, the way that we interpreted, like, we basically made America Genosha. And people who really love the X-Men so much know that Genosha hasn't been actually articulated in any satisfactory way, besides maybe the cartoon and maybe like 15 issues of the comics. Genosha being a society that goes, yeah, mutants are here, and we put them to work or they're dead. And that's that, buddy. That's that. Not all this tumult, all this consternation, all this talking. Put them to work or they're dead. And people, a society built on that, could do amazing things. We could argue that that's been already done before. You know what I mean? You make somebody useful or dead, and then put them to work doing all this amazing stuff for your society. It's an idea that's well worn, let's say. And so we're graduating that concept. And I just think it's very interesting that we set up that dynamic instead of just being costume nonsense like Bill was talking about. I wish more people, a lot of people did appreciate that about our pitch.
They did. We got a lot of positive comments, but this one, not so positive. From Rudy.
Rudy.
First of all, you should be a fan of X-Men to give an input. Asking the questions if people still want X-Men. Oh, hold on. I got to say that right. Asking the questions if people still want X-Men? Well, duh. Dumb question. Just stick to the comics and 90s animation. It's a win-win for fans and money for Disney. Problem solved.
Bunch of exclamation points.
Rudy, you solved it. You solved it, Rudy. Rudy!
Well, first, okay, I know I just talked, but I got to talk again. Dude, no. Okay, I said it in that comment. It's in the pinned comment and on the video. You don't just take the X-Men animation. The X-Men animation, the people who the figureheads of that, follow me on Twitter now because I've talked about them a lot. They are great and they're brilliant people. But to say they did the end all of the whole X-Men is so insane. 10 issues of Jim Lee before he jumped ship to go be the head of DC eventually. That's what you think is the apex of the X-Men? You don't know nothing about no Paul Smith. You don't know about JR. You know what I'm saying? You don't know. I hate this fan. I hate this type of fan in regards to this. I'm sorry. I hate it. I'm sorry.
It's also ridiculous to redo that cartoon. Like, look, I loved that cartoon as a kid. It's a great cartoon from that generation. It also has some of the worst dialogue that if you put inside of a movie would be terrible. At one point,
I disagree, you egg-sucking piece of gutter trash.
Oh, yeah.
I disagree.
You're right. The time when Rogue says, "What's got up her butt, sugar?" is perfect.
Okay, but obviously these people who have this point of view are not so idiotic that they think they could just do a one-to-one translation. What they imagine in their head is some sort of a newfangled way to articulate all of those old stories, and they love them because they're distillations of larger, more complex, more ridiculous stories from the X-Men lore. And all we were trying to do is like update the way the X-Men articulate themselves to the world.
But I just have to ask too, like, if you're a fan of the MCU, at this point you should know that none of these stories are a one-to-one translation. So never ever have you taken the comics or taken a cartoon or taken anything and said, let's do that for realsies. They definitely homage, they borrow, they cherry pick, and that's why you get something like Thor Ragnarok, which is like 4 different stories plus 2 stories they just made up all in one movie. So the idea that at this point Marvel would be like, well, it worked so well in the comics, let's do a frame for frame translation, like that just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I would also, I mean, just to be serious about this comment, because I do think this is just judging based on the comments we got, it's a widespread idea. I think what you run into is like, what do you mean stick with the comics? Because yeah, you could do the Jim Lee comics that 90s animation series was based on, but realistically, like, those aren't the best X-Men stories. The best X-Men stories were probably from the 80s. Some people would argue that the best X-Men stories are going on right now. Some people would say that the best X-Men stories was the Joss Whedon run and the Grant Morrison run in the early 2000s. And they all have different rosters, and they all have totally different approaches to the whole hate and feared by the world they're trying to protect. You know, there is no from the comics with the X-Men. You got to really define what era you're talking about. And for us, I think we did a pretty decent job of defining, like, we are going to take the giant size X-Men cast from 1972 or 3, whenever that new lineup with Wolverine debuted. We're going to take some of the original cast. We're going to cherry pick, Rogue. I think we rightfully got rid of Gambit, but we'll cherry pick a few other people. And then here are the different teams, and here is how they're going to relate to each other. That's actually building a story. You can't just say, oh, do it like the comics, because the comics have a new story every 6 months or so. And before decompressed storytelling, it was every month. So it's not a comment that really holds water. I'm sorry. It just doesn't mean anything, which is why we were pretty flippant about this comment when we first heard it, because it's words that don't mean anything.
Well, you're showing your colors again as a fake nerd because that comic, Giant Size X-Men, came out in 1975. You said 72 or 3, so
Yep.
you know what I mean? So it's like, but that was beautiful, Bill. That really well reasoned.
Cool. All right, let's get to the next one, which is very similar.
There's no good comments on this son of a bitch.
No, we're just starting off with some of the bad ones, and then we'll go into the good ones. You always start it off with the grumpy ones, and then get to the ones where they're nice to you.
We're telling a story here. I tried to order them in a way that tells a story. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to mess with your arc. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, geez, Ed, get it together. But hold on, I do have one important message from somebody. Hold on. Why you not take a gamble on Gambit? Okay, that's it.
At first, I thought that was an Asian accent. I thought we were going to get canceled. It somehow turned into a Cajun accent, which we probably should still get canceled for.
Asian into Cajun.
Deck of cards.
Oh, Cajun.
Yep, Gambit just yells out, "Deck of cards!" whenever he goes into battle.
Like Leroy Jenkins, just deck of cards.
Look, no one said that I was good at accents, all right? There's a reason that Bill and Ed do the voices, okay?
I do.
And Billy.
Oh, God.
So we got Eugene. Eugene said, there is a market demand for X-Men. We just demand that you do it right. Sony screwed the pooch so badly that anything associated with the franchise gives you bubble guts. First and foremost, I know. All right. First and foremost, try getting the roster with the correct timeline, okay? Actually read the comic to get a feel and common knowledge of why myself, among others, waited over 30 years to see X-Men on screen. I would suggest you start from the beginning with the original X-Men, Cyclops, Beast, Angel, Iceman, Marvel Girl. Don't take liberties, just start at the beginning and go from there.
I stopped paying attention when he said Sony screwed the pooch. I was like, no, you don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
you don't even know who screwed the pooch. So,
but there is an interesting thing happening here. Like if you do go through and read all these comments in total, you will see why this is so hard. Because here's Eugene, and Eugene is saying, you don't take liberties. You start at the beginning with the originals and then you build. And I get it, Eugene. I get it. There is another guy in the comments who's like, don't touch the originals. They're boring. Everybody knows they're the worst characters. If you're going to use X-Force and X-Factor, actually go with the 90s lineups. People will love Boom Boom and Shatterstar. Those should be your stars. So Eugene and that guy, you guys should have a cage match, and we're not going to pay attention to either one of you. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, I think that's
you've reached the cage match of stupidity. Okay, sorry,
but this is the thing, right? Like, and I don't say that just to be a dick, although I like being a dick. But I say that because, like, when you're actually sitting down to write this stuff, the only questions you could ask yourself have to do with theme and character. The rest of it is just there to be helpful. Like, the fact that the comics exist is great because it's helpful. Like, you can't actually follow a formula because, as I just stated, there is no formula that everybody agrees on anyway. So you have to sit down and just ask yourself, as we always do, what story are we telling? What is it about? And what characters do you need to tell that story the best way? That's the only way to approach it.
And in regards to chronology, just real one quick point. The way that they made Bucky older than, or rather like the same age as Steve and a bigger, buffer version of him, and then Steve like looking up to his best buddy and blah, blah, that is a major violation of canon. And it's 100% better than canon. And almost everybody agrees with those two statements I just made. So come on, man.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. Billy, you got anything else to add?
I'm not a real fan, so I shouldn't be giving input.
Oh, yeah. Shut your mouth. Okay.
Well, shut your mouth and know your role, non-fan, Billy.
All right, well, let's get to this next comment from Ralph. I wasn't familiar with Reboot It, now a subscriber, so I was bummed when it soaked in. Yeah, that's right. Get on there, subscribe. If you're watching this, push that subscribe button, that like button, the alarm bell. Get on it. Okay, let's read the rest of this. So, I was bummed when it soaked in that you don't work for Marvel. I'm 69 and read the original comics and loved them, but don't worship them. I'm good with cherry picking the best ideas from the animated series and previous movies, but you have to show a little respect for the backstories from the comics. Rogue stole her flying ability from Captain Marvel. Rogue did not start out that powerful. You have some brilliant ideas here of how to introduce the X-Men on Disney+, except I would put it pre-Xavier Institute of any kind. This has got to mesh with the MCU so far. Maybe mutations are stimulated by Snap and Blip, with the X Factor planted by Eternals, introduce the characters individually as teenager and not just by impossible chance all in high school together. Develop the poorly developed characters like Storm, Shadowcat, Nightcrawler, Gambit, not the original 5. I don't want to see something that's already been done on the screen, especially where it was done atrociously. But give me more mutants, definitely.
I feel like this is the calmer, tamer version of the last two comments combined, which is like, hey, you guys did a great job, but show some respect for what's been done before, which I don't know. Like we did. Like I think you're right, Bill. Everyone's gonna have their lineup. The thing with the X-Men is like you ask someone what is the crucial 5 characters we have to have, and you're never gonna get the same combination of 5, no matter what. In terms of like Rogue getting her powers from Captain Marvel, like I agree with you on certain theories, which like, you know, respect the backstories or some of the backstories. I don't feel like we have to acknowledge or use every one of them. And I don't think her running into Captain Marvel and them tussling and her getting those powers and then going back to this story, like that's too much. And Captain Marvel doesn't need to be a part of this. Then it starts to just get too MCU incestuous, which so I love the MCU, but sometimes the MCU definitely gets too incestuous with, oh, you want to come be in my movie? Come over here. I just don't think we need that. But otherwise, man, you're 69 years old and you've read all these comics. Like you definitely have the knowledge and everything. And I appreciate you at least just listening to our pitch. Yeah,
absolutely.
Ralph,
and having an open mind about it.
Yeah,
I love this comment, and frankly, like when Ralph said, "I'm good with cherry picking the best ideas from the animated series and previous movies," like I was to completion already with this comment, so the rest of it was just the afterglow. That said, the one thing I do want to address, I hate this stupid fan bullshit of the Snap and the Blip caused mutants. Get out of here with that garbage. That's so dumb. That's just dumb.
Well, dude, it's like being like the Snap and the Blip caused break dancing. Like you know, like what does it matter? Like it's a cool phenomenon all on its own. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to explain it with some other crap that happened with Grimace a world away. That's so nuts. And again, we obey the secret history of mutants. There's no way, as we stated in the episode, there's no way you just start catching on fire or start making clouds do stuff or start becoming super strong and you just tell everybody. There's no way. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of weird stuff that would happen. There would be no word for what a mutant was for 30, 40, 50 years, even in the highest circles that knew about what this was. So come on with this. We're just going to introduce it of this Snap. 3 seasons of television is how you introduce the concept to a world this complex with this many types of things going on.
Well, and this kind of reminds me of like, I think this is all comes down to how subjective people's opinions about things are. And that's why the X-Men is such a hard situation because, I mean, even in Spider-Man, like, what's your favorite part about Spider-Man? I bet all 4 of us would have different answers. Like, you know, for me, I like that he's super smart and funny. The spider powers are extra bonuses in my mind. I really enjoy how intelligent this character is and that he's also awkward because I was semi-intelligent and awkward when I was a kid. You know what I mean? Like, so there's these things that everybody's going to relate to something different. So this guy, maybe he relates to Gambit because he loves playing with cards or whatever. I don't know. And wearing trench coats, you know? Maybe that's
that guy's Ricky J.
But what I'm saying is like everybody has a different concept of what's important to them from the X-Men. It's something that hit them a specific way. Some people are really into the part that you talked about, like the social idea of being ostracized and not feeling like you're part of humanity, even though it's from something you can't help that happened to you. Like some people love that. Some people just love that, Wolverine heals really quick. Whatever it is, it's going to be hard to please everybody. And I think that you can't, anytime we make anything, we can't obsess with how to please everybody. We just can't, or we'll have a bad story. And in fact, when you obsess with how to please everybody, you get the Snyder cut, and you please like 14 people who are kind of edgelords, which is fine. Or 14 million people who are edgelords. Either way, that's cool, but it also is not going to be pleasing to everybody. And that was that guy's thing, and didn't fit for me, but it might fit for other people. And I guess that's just kind of how things work, and you do the best you can with what you got.
Yeah. So what's the next comment?
Let's get to it. We got a lot of love for Rogue in the comments. A lot of comments like this one from May. What about Rogue being introduced in Captain Marvel? She would be a villain introducing the Brotherhood of Mutants. Leader would be Destiny instead of Mystique or Magneto. I can picture Jodie Foster playing her character. Rogue would fight Captain Marvel and gain her powers, then be able to fly. None of the X-Men movies from Fox's never showed the character flying abilities. Oof. I'm going to assume that she doesn't speak English as a first language and not make fun of the sentence structure there.
But you are going to call it out, even though you're saying you're not. Let me just jump on this for a second, because this actually, Ralph said sort of the same thing in his previous comment, and this came up quite a bit in the comments as well. The idea, like, introduce the X-Men as supporting characters or villains kind of across all these other movies, right? So Rogue is an obvious one for Captain Marvel. Maybe you get like Magic and Colossus in a Doctor Strange movie. Maybe the Eternals could introduce Apocalypse or something. You know what I mean? Like, there's obvious ways to do all that. I just don't know. Like, I could see that being cool, because it's like they all are getting different movies. Maybe you get a Wolverine movie or a Cyclops movie, and it all culminates in an Avengers-like team up. It just feels like so much homework, though. And granted, I know that like watching Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America didn't exactly feel like homework leading up to the Avengers, but I feel like now there's already so much to keep track of, and there's already such a sense of like history and knowledge necessary to come into these movies. Do you really want to build up more? I don't know. It feels like a weird choice to me. It feels like, yes, integrate the X-Men with the universe, but keep them their own franchise at least. Maybe I'm out of touch, but that's how I feel.
Fair enough. Billy, Ed.
Billy.
I already commented on the last one that I think it's too much. I personally think, like, sure, that's a choice, but that's like a completely different story than what we pitched. So it's like, yeah, if you were playing the home game version of Reboot It, maybe that's your version. But not that May did this. So May, I am not calling you out. But I sometimes in the comments, it's like, well, why didn't you do this pitch? And it's their pitch. It's like, because we didn't, because the four of us are not you. But if you're playing at home, I'm glad that you came up with that one. Like, I never understand the why didn't you do my idea pitch? Like, because we didn't. We're not you. So that's why I like our pitch better.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we got any more comments? Yeah.
Yeah, we sure do. We got another one that's similar, and actually I think this is the one that Bill mentioned the last time from Adam. You guys really lost me going with any version of a classic X-Men lineup. If you want to do X-Factor or X-Force, I think that's a great way to introduce mutants, but it defeats the purpose of changing the story so drastically if we're going to use the same characters we've seen over and over. If we're doing X-Factor, it shouldn't quack like the X-Men, because people will not think it's cool when those expectations are flipped. Yes, use Warpath, use Phantom X, Polaris, Havoc, Boom Boom, Avalanche, or Pyro. Characters that fit the story you're wanting to tell and are more normally associated with the X-Men spin-off teams you keep mentioning. You've talked about the long-lost sibling thing and the moment where the team realizes that they're the bad guys. That should be Alex and Scott, only having recently found out that the other is even alive. I love your pitch. I just wish you didn't fall into using the same characters. I know they're the most popular and notable, but fan favorites like Phantom X and Boom Boom will appeal to the general audiences for this movie.
I mean, but that's like, this is where the business part of me comes in. It's like, are you telling me that we are going to do an X-Men anything that doesn't at least have Cyclops and Storm that we can put on post? Like, Guardians of the Galaxy, do not throw that in my face, because that was like the 10th or 11th movie in the MCU. Like, that was definitely, they're like, well, if this doesn't work, we still gave you a Captain America this year, and you've got a whatever, an Avengers coming next year. It'll be all right. It just so happened to work out in their favor. But I think if you're doing something like X-Men, which people do know, you just can't put out a roster of mutants that no one knows. Like, there is still a business side to what we're trying to do, and that's part of the kayfabe for a reason. It's because no producer in their right mind would not put at least 4 or 5 instantly recognizable, merchandisable characters that they can market the hell out of in an X-Men movie. Like, that would just be stupid.
Yeah, and I think people don't really look at how much we put into both the team dynamics for like actual superhero action and the castability in regards to having diverse people in there without it being forced, as the incels like to say. We had it be naturalistically diverse across all types of social strata and all sorts of government allegiance or not. Terrorist organizations even had their own like style in there. Reagan John Page is a terrorist. Come on, man, that's nuts. There was so much that we did there to make these cast members different enough for the new generation, but still, hey, that's Scott, that's Storm, finally getting a good part. We kind of played the part, I mean, at least I did, and I think a lot of us did it in the middle of that part, where we were trying to invest the characters who have, yes, been in movies before, but never like this, never fully fleshed in a way that they were actually appealing and more resembled their comic book roots. That was one of the things we did for the fans, is make those characters be in there. So to say that we did wrong by doing that, and Phantom X with his ship that's made of another world and his sleight of hand ability, come on. We're
Phantom X is a Grant Morrison character, so I have to like him for that reason.
No,
it's just Phantom a rule.
Phantom X is awesome standing next to other cool X-Men. I would love to see him be part of this at some point, be part of the terrorist cell or something. He has great terrorist abilities. I would love him to be in this project at some point. But one of the main guys in lieu of Storm or somebody, get out of here. That's crazy.
Yeah, I think, Billy, you hit on this, but one of the things that, as cool as all those characters are, like I said, I like Phantom X. I think Polaris is great. Havoc, I think, is terrible, but Boom Boom, I don't have a problem with. Like, there's a lot of good characters that you mentioned, but you're not going to get away from the idea that this is the B team. It was the problem with the New Mutants. It was the problem with Legion. Like, it's going to feel like off-brand X-Men. Like, oh, you can't use the big characters? It just will. I guarantee you, not to derail the conversation too much, but like, I guarantee you that at Warner Brothers right now, when they're talking to J.J. Abrams and Ta-Nehisi Coates about Black Superman, I guarantee the pitch was more along the lines of Earth 23, Calvin Ellis, President Superman. And everybody at Warner Brothers is going, but we're not going to make a Superman movie where he's not Clark Kent because people know he's Clark Kent. So what are you talking about? It's like, you can't get away from audience expectations in that way. You know, it's the audience knows that the A team of X-Men includes Cyclops, Storm, Jean Grey, and Wolverine at the very least. So if you're not using them, you're using the B team or the C team. It's just the reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough. So let's get to Strange Bake. Why not take it more of the heroes route? Develop them as people discovering their powers, slowly being pulled together by an outside force before they have code names or jets. Final scene in the season, they meet Xavier, to which Bill replied, "Why would we do that?" I don't know. Maybe to have some character development and stay true to the characters. You guys are making wholesale changes for the sake of change instead of changing the very concept of the characters and their backstories. Why not start simple and focus on who they are before the school, before Xavier, a bunch of scared kids, not a paramilitary organization. That's how you earn them becoming X-Men.
But what did we change though? Like even Cyclops, which we brought in an element of his character that came much later in the X-Men run with like the all new or Uncanny X-Men, whatever it was in like 2012, where he was like a terrorist and he was not associated with the main group because he was too extreme, but he definitely felt justified in what he was doing. Like that exists. That's not a wholesale change. It's a change maybe like the way we're presenting it, but we didn't invent that aspect of Cyclops. Like it exists out there. And that's where it's like, this is where it does feel with some of these comic book properties that you just cannot please a fan because it's like, stick to the comics. Okay, well, that's from the comics. Yeah, but you're making wholesale changes. It's like, but you just told me to pull the stuff that I like from the comics. That's in there. We did that throughout this entire pitch. It is an entirely brand new, fresh representation of a bunch of stuff that already exists. We didn't make Storm a 55-year-old white man from Mississippi. It is still Storm, but the way that we presented it to you was slightly different. It's the difference is, I want salmon. Okay, do you want baked salmon or do you want salmon sashimi? It's still the same fucking fish, but we just presented it in a new way. So I don't get where this, like, you did this wrong or you didn't do that. I can totally see now why certain creators and certain directors and certain actors just get the hell off social media because you're not going to win. So you might as well just bank that check and just be happy that the residuals are coming in and don't even listen to what anyone says about it.
Yeah.
Yes to all that. I think that is a well-earned comment by Billy. The reason I asked why would we do that when this guy made his comment of like, why not make it more like Heroes, is because, hey, buddy, I also remember when the first season of Heroes came out and everybody was like, holy crap, this is how they should have done X-Men. And guess what? That was 15 years ago. And Heroes ran for 3 or 4 seasons or whatever. Like, we live in a world where that happened. We can't now live in another reality. And so having lived in a world where Heroes already told that story in that way, no, we're not going to just do it with the original flavor. It's like, oh man, wouldn't it be great if Lay's would have come up with like form pressed stackable chips in a cylindrical container? Yeah, it probably would have been great. But you know what? Pringles exists, so Lay's isn't going to do it. Even though I think they have now. But you know what? It's not
they actually
selling.
have. They're called stacks. But still.
It's even more to the point. Even more to the point. Now it looks like Lay's is ripping off Pringles when all Pringles did was put Lay's in a new shape. But now Lay's does it and they look like they're ripping off Pringles. Like, it's just the reality, man. Like, we can't hop into another universe where the thing that you wished had happened differently didn't happen. You know what I mean? It's just that's frustrating to me.
And also, this is the thing, and this is probably the most clear thing I'm gonna say this whole episode. The reason why X-Men crap is happening now is always at the heart of the story, right? It's right at the start of the conflict between them and man, them and other mutants. That's when X-Men as a property always starts on some level. And we did that. We didn't start before it starts. We started when it starts, when there actually start to be factions forming, when there start to be a general ethos for how to deal with mutants, when there start to be different slots you can go as a mutant. Over here towards the educational side, over here towards the terrorist side, over here towards the I got sparkly powers, but at least I got a job and a 401k side. We have all these options for you to be as a mutant in this universe that we're starting at this point. We started at this point for a reason, and it's fresh as hell.
And on top of that, we have a great arcs for everybody. Everybody learns something in this and becomes better, and leads to making the choice to come together. Like, I mean, I think that's great. Like, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to give these characters arcs.
I want to jump on that, Ron, because I think implicit in the idea that, oh, you just start with them being scared of their powers and they're scared kids and they have to find each other and become a family. It's like, how many times have we seen that story in X-Men media, in X-Men cartoons, in things not having anything to do with X-Men? Like, it's tired. It's so easy. We're telling a totally different take on a bunch of random people randomly get superpowers. Like, yeah, there's the boring version where they all get scared and have to go and find each other. Or there's our version, which is the non-boring version, which is, okay, they all decide to do something with those powers, and allegiances form, and goals form, and people with cross motivations eventually are going to come up against each other. That is a story. I hate this idea. Like, so many comic book fans defer to this idea of like, let's wallow in the first act. Let's wallow in the choice to heed the call to adventure. Let's wallow in the ordinary world being disrupted. It's like, that's not a story, man. That's a setup for a story. Tell me what the story is. And that's what we did. So I'm with you, Ron. You're right.
So we got one more very, and I think this might be the very most important comment that we've gotten on any of our videos ever. So it's from Aaron Nutt. My last name is Nutt. Ron's kids and mine can never marry.
I think you hyphenate that name and you go to town, baby.
Yeah. Ron Swallow Nut? I don't understand. What's the problem?
Don't see it.
I believe that's something about a bird that carries nuts to poor people. I believe that's what that's about.
Oh, man.
And feeds them.
As always on the rewinds, to completion, baby.
Completion.
Absolutely. And you know what? Before we get out of here, I do want to point out there were a ton of very nice, positive, encouraging comments that were left on the episode. And we want to thank every single one of you that dropped a line just to welcome us back. So we love all of you guys. We really
there were a lot of nice ones that were just happy to see that we were doing another season. So thank all of even the ones that we just spent an hour tearing you a new one. Thank you for watching and for commenting. Yep. We're hard on you, but we love you.
And we want to hear your opinions.
Because we love.
Yeah, exactly. And we want to hear your opinions. We think disagreements are important. And you can still disagree with what we just said and think that your idea is the right idea. I mean, you're wrong. Absolutely wrong. But you can totally do that. See, I took a bill there. I was a bill there. That was good.
Fully
good.
Fully co-signed. Yeah. It's like a drug, baby. Once you start, you can't stop.
Oh yeah. That first insolence is free, and then
the thing is, I'm gonna have to be right a lot more if I'm gonna do that, Bill. I'm gonna have to work on that.
It's a double-edged sword.
So that does it for Reboot Rewind. On behalf of myself, Ed Greer, producer Bill, and Billy Business, we want to thank you for watching and being part of this special community we built here. We love you guys. Next week, we're rewinding the episode that was born from the comments on X-Men. So stay tuned and subscribe to find out what we're tackling next.